Hi guys, it's Chart here, and as promised, I'm going to go through this essay question. Now, this essay question is on the causes of revolution, specifically the causes of the Russian Revolution, and you would find this in part B of the exam in the causes section. And if you got this question, there's a whole range of things you would need to think about. Now, even if you got a question on political opposition in source analysis, writing this essay will be really useful, I think. So let's have a look at the question. Evaluate to the extent to which political opposition was a cause of revolution. So there's a couple things here that I straight away see. Evaluate the extent to which. How much is political opposition responsible for revolution? The second thing that I think is really important here is this notion of revolution. Lots of students will limit their understanding of this, okay? So if you wanted to talk about this, the minimum requirement is that you need to look at February 1917 and October 1917. And you probably need to also differentiate between those, okay? How much was political opposition, a cause of revolution in February 1917, and how much was it in October 1917? Because you've got so much to write about, I don't necessarily think this is one of those essays where you can say, yeah, political opposition was a cause of revolution. However, let me tell you everything else I know, okay? So to me, this probably is going to fall into the structure of yes, however. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, my first body paragraph is going to look at political opposition as a cause of revolution and evaluate it in the context of February 1917. Okay, so this is body, para, or argument one. I'll call it arg one. Arg one, yes, and I'm going to focus. Oh my goodness, Catherine's having trouble there. Yes, and I'm going to focus on yes, and focus on Feb 1917. So ARG2 is going to be yes, and focus on October 1917 with some comparison back to Feb 1917. However, there's going to be a range of other things that lead to revolution. And there's a range of things here I could talk about. However, for example, World War I. As a context, arguably, World War I is a cause of both revolutions. Okay, so in February 1917, World War I had exacerbated a whole range of already internal problems, including the fact that the Tsarina is now in charge because the Tsar has become the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces. World War I is also a cause of the October 1917 revolution because the provisional government did not get them out of the war. And in fact, under Kerensky's leadership, we saw great defeat in the June offensive. Okay, so World War I, for sure. Now, you might say, okay, where am I going to put this notion of, well, really, this is also about poor leadership. Okay, this is also about poor leadership. So I'm going to put it where it belongs. So the February 1917 revolution is certainly about political opposition, but it's not the political opposition you would think. It's not the Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. It's the Duma. So it's the liberal reformists. And I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to say this is aided by the Tsar's ineffectual leadership. So I'm going to whack into that body paragraph that. My second body paragraph, I'm going to say, yeah, political opposition is much more a cause now. Why? We have this huge tension between the provisional government and the Petrograd Soviet Order Number 1. This is very much about the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks versus the provisional government. Remember, of course, we do have one member of the Social Revolutionaries, that is Kerensky, in the provisional government, but this is even more so. So I'm going to say more so than in Feb 1917. Political opposition is a cause of the October Revolution. Sorry, my yard is being mowed at the moment, so you can hear that in the background. Apologies. So I'm really going to do that one there. However, I might also say here, however, instability in the provisional government as a result of dual authority allowed political opposition to thrive. Okay? Then my third body paragraph is going to say, really, World War I beyond this is a context that really hammers this home. So this is what my thinking is about this, okay? Now, what do I mean? Let's go back and pick this apart. What is political opposition? What is political opposition? Well, of course, what I'm talking about is political parties. I'm talking about political leaders. I'm talking about political ideologies. And you've got to have a really good grasp of what these things mean. Okay. So I've just started recording again, and you're going to notice a few things that I've added because I'm thinking as I do this, okay? Earlier on, I said that at a minimum, you must talk about February 1917 and October 1917. What I should have elaborated on is that related to February 1917 is the 1905 revolution. Now, of course, we know it's not a revolution, but 1905 revolution sees the emergence of the liberal reformists, and these are the people who eventually are the political opposition within Duma 4. They're the progressive bloc who take down the Tsar. So I've added here, you could reflect back on the political parties which emerged as a result of the 1905 revolution. The emergence of liberal reformism. This was essential to the evolution of political opposition within Duma 4 and the establishment of the provisional government. And these are the people that took down the Tsar. These are the people that wrote a letter to him demanding his abdication. So let's just stop for a while and have a look at what I've put up the top here, because I want to talk through this because it is not simple. I want to yet again talk through this political spectrum because it's not a simple one to understand. It takes a little while to story it, to understand it, okay? And I've added a little bit into this since you saw it last. Okay, so what you need to know is you need to know the political parties. Okay, so the political parties are up the top. I mean, they're autocrats, but I'm going to call them Tsarists. That might make it a bit easier for you. Okay, so you have the Tsarists, you have the Octoberists, the Cadets, the SRs or Social Revolutionaries, the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, right? And you should know that the Octoberists and the Cadets emerged as a consequence of what happened in 1905. Okay, so they emerged in response to the Tsar issuing the October Manifesto. Now, we've been talking about the Tsar and about what he does. He offers reform sometimes, and sometimes he offers repression. The October Manifesto was a sense of reform. And so you had these moderate parties. They want reform, but they're not asking for everything. Okay, so liberal, they want some freedom and they want reform, but they don't want the Tsar to go. And these guys, the Cadets and the Octoberists, are going to be really critical in taking down the Tsar in February of 1917. And that is deeply ironic because you would have thought that the revolution would be from far more extremist ideas. Okay, so what I think you really need to know is you need to know your Dumas here. And you need to know that Duma 4 has got some key players in it. And these key players are going to be instrumental in the establishment of the provisional government after that first February revolution. So have a look here. Have a look at Rodzianko. Rodzianko is the Prime Minister of the 4th Duma. He is the man that writes to the Tsar and says, you've got to do something. We are on the brink of exploding. Okay? Prince Lvov is the first Prime Minister of the provisional government. And you might want to consider why they chose him. Okay, he's a cadet, so he's in the middle of some of the representation, but he's also an aristocrat. So they've probably chosen him as he's quite palatable to those people who are used to having an aristocratic kind of presence and leader. Okay, we also have Kerensky. Kerensky, remember, occupies a really unique position in the provisional government. Now, he'll become prime minister in that provisional government later on. But what's really interesting about Kerensky is that he sits in this space between the provisional government and between the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks in this period known as dual authority. Okay, dual authority. Okay, this is still in our causes of revolution. The dual authority refers to the Petrograd Soviet Order number 1. Soviet Order number 1 means that the provisional government has power, but it has no muscle. It has no way of enforcing its power. It needs the military expertise of the Petrograd garrison, which the Bolsheviks have in terms of alliance. Okay? So knowing that will be really important. So have a look at this spectrum, if you like. Okay? You could get a question on liberal reformism. These are the guys that really did want to work with the Tsar, but the Tsar burnt them, okay? Duma number 1 is full of Octoberists, and the Tsar thinks they are too radical. He dismisses it. Duma number 2, full of cadets, even more radical. He dismisses it. Duma number 3 is Tsarist, okay? It's got Stolypin as the prime minister, very conservative, and under Stolypin, we see some success in reform and repression. He manages to de-revolutionize the peasantry by giving them land reform. But then he dies. So Duma number 4 is this strange mix. You've got some representation of the SRs, you've got cadets and Octoberists. So when I use this spectra, I say the political opposition for the February Revolution came from within the Duma. It came from these really moderate groups. So that's why people say the Duma was a training ground for revolutionaries. Okay, so this is a really interesting point. Now, if I'm going to talk about liberal reformists and how they became the political opposition for the February 1917 revolution, I have to talk about where they came from. And they emerged out of 1905. They offered the Tsar scads of opportunity to do something about it. Okay? If I then compare that revolution with the October Revolution, the October Revolution has a different form of political opposition. By now, Lenin has returned. He has announced an ideological sort of framework for the future. Peace, bread and land. He offers the people a sense of what the future will hold, whereas the provisional government cannot. Okay, so understanding the role of the Bolsheviks, Mensheviks, and the Petrograd Soviet as political opponents in this period is really, really important. And you should understand that this political opposition is evident in the July days, where they try to take down the provisional government and they fail. They fail miserably. And they learn from that. They get put in jail. Okay? And then the provisional government let them out when Kornilov tries a military coup. They think, God, we need the Bolsheviks and Mensheviks to help us. But now they've let them out and given them weapons. So this is a really interesting diagram to assist you. So let's go back and have a look at this. I'm probably thinking about this going to talk about yes, political opposition was a cause of revolution. Okay, and that political opposition is a response to the Tsar's ineffective leadership. Okay, and that political opposition emerged very early on. Some of it was radical, but it's not the radical forms of that opposition that take down the Tsar in February 1917. Indeed, people like Lenin aren't even in the country. They've been banished, okay? So too, we see political opposition as a cause of the second revolution in October 1917, but it's far more radical. It's far more revolutionized. It is the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks here who are taking power. Actually, it's the Bolsheviks. And what I might add in here is the Milrevcom, the Military Revolutionary Committee that is dominated by Bolsheviks, and how they were able to utilize that to exert their political opposition. My third argument is going to be, however, the whole situation is exacerbated by World War I. Okay? In both instances, the Tsar and the provisional government refused to get out of the war, and that created a powder keg situation. One more thing before I go. I was thinking about this political opposition thing. You've got parties, leaders, and ideologies that you've got to think about, but you've got to think about how did they affect people? There are riots and demonstrations and all forms of protest, but sometimes that protest is not linked to a specific party or leader. Sometimes it is just a response to what's going on. So I want you to think about, when you see riots and demonstrations, when are they in support of political opposition, and when are they just protesting what's going on? So too, how do these riots, demonstrations and strikes, how do they help political opposition to take power? Okay, there you go. You can hear my little, what's it called, windy blower there in my backyard. I'll say goodbye now, and I'll leave you to give this a red hot go. If you are stuck, if you are having a horrible time with this, come and sit down and I'll write it on the board and we'll go through it, okay? But don't ignore it. Thanks very much.